Greg was on last night, so he's logging out and getting on today. Greg is having a difficult time getting on.
So just so everybody knows, Steve is working with Ricky on her request. So he's in the room, and when I'm done, I'm going to go away and he's going to take over my spot here on the Zoom meeting. Just so everybody knows that. He's kind of technologically challenged, so it's difficult. So I'm helping him out. I'm his IT.
I'd say that's, to put it lightly, seeing him in video court or not doing video court. Not even trying to do video court, telling the judge I ain't doing it.
I just learned that you can eat elm seeds. Did anyone know that?
We should start eating them because sooner or later we're going to have the invasion of the elm seed beetle. If everybody sure, that's what's coming next.
Yeah, we got before the beetles do.
Yeah, exactly.
Can add them to your salads. That's what I'm reading. Sorry, that was my attempt at filling the air.
Hey, Lynn, would you call Evan for me? I'm on the phone with Greg, and we're trying to get him hooked up. Would you call Evan and Curtis and find out where they're at? Chris is working with Greg right now.
Maybe our computers have just had enough of us and they don't want to support us anymore. They don't want us to do these Zoom meetings. It's the revenge of the computers.
Apparently my calls are being screened out.
He's on.
Christina?
Okay.
Oh, there's, okay, we've got Greg Holiday.
I think you're good. You're not seeing everybody else?
Well, we see you, Greg.
Oh, 11 minutes late.
Greg, can you hear me? You're on mute, so I can't hear you.
We got a quorum, so.
We've got a quorum.
We have a quorum for the Friends matter, but we don't have a quorum for community rebuilds because Gabriel has to recuse himself since he participated in that process.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, we might need one more council member then. BOE
How,
member.
Jaylyn, have you been able to get a hold of either Evan or Curtis?
No, their phones both went to voicemail and I left a message on each of them asking them to either call me back or text and have not heard anything.
I forgot my phone. I'd be whooping some booty by text, but I can't. I don't have it.
Text them.
So-
I guess we move ahead with the Friends of Arches and Canyonlands. And then if hopefully we will have one of our other members join us. I want to apologize. I am very surprised. This is an important meeting and I'm concerned. So we will do, Christina, should I open?
Yeah, I would go ahead. Yep.
Am I cutting out?
A little bit.
I'll turn off my video. I am calling to order the Grand Canyon Board of Equalization hearing for Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020. Present, myself, Mary McGann, Gabriel Wojtek, Council Member, Jaylyn Hawks, Council Member, Greg Halliday, Council Member. We also have our Clerk Auditor, Quinn Hall, and our County Administrator, Chris Baird, and our County Attorney, Christina Sloan. Jaylyn, I did say your name, correct? And we all have Casey Cook from Arches National Park and Joette Langanese, who is the CEO of Friends of Arches and Canyonlands and the CEO of Moab Community Rebuild, Ricky Epperson. I will begin by reading an introduction to our hearing. This is not an appeal. This is a meeting rescheduled because the first, when it was handled on the 21st, we needed to, it was not handled correctly. And on the request of Friends of Arches and Canyonlands and Moab Community Rebuild, the Board of Equalization is conducting a hearing to determine if the applicant's use of 48 North, 400 East for Friends of Arches and Canyonlands, and 150 South, 200 East, and 140 South, 200 and East for Moab Community Rebuild. The statutes governing an organization's right to a tax exemption is found in Utah Statute 59-2-1101 and 1102, and the Utah Constitution at Article 13, Section 3, which states that property held by a nonprofit organization that is used exclusively for religious, charitable, or educational purposes shall be exempt from taxation. Here the applicants applied for the exemption for the properties known as 48 North, 400 East, 140 South, 200 East, and 150 South, 200 East, which request was submitted prior to March 1st. Under Utah statute, the Board of Equalization must grant the applicant a hearing on their request and render a written decision on or before May 1st. The board has received the applicant's written request dated before March 1st. The board's role in the hearing is quasi-judicial. During the hearing today, the board will consider all evidence, factual or legal, the applicant wishes to present. I ask that each applicant try to present your evidence within 10 minutes. The applicant may present any witness that it wishes and to make any statement that it wishes. The applicant may be represented by an attorney, or it may make its presentation itself. During the hearing, the board will not require compliance with the rules of evidence. During applicant's presentation, the board may interrupt to ask the applicant questions in an effort to fully understand the evidence and the issues at the time of presentation. The board shall also consider applicants' written requests for exemption and supporting documents, as well as our own Board of Equalization tax exempt guidelines as we make our decision. We have those documents before us today. If the applicant wishes to refer to any portion of them, the board may not consider the county's budget, or financial status, or public comment, or public clamor in considering the evidence before it. If the board finds that the property owned by a nonprofit organization is exclusively used for charitable purposes, then the property is automatically tax exempt under Utah statute and Utah Constitution. It is unlikely that we will make a decision on the case during the hearing, but instead we will likely review the information presented and make a decision as soon as we can. The decision will be made in writing on or before May 1st, and the applicant will receive a copy of it. The applicant has the right to appeal to the board's written decision to the Utah Tax Commission within 30 days at the date of decision under Utah Statute 59-2-1006. Chris Baird, at this time, would you explain how the money from a tax exempt is distributed or reallocated? We have had Curtis Wells join the meeting. Thank you, Curtis.
Yeah, so it makes more sense to just describe how property tax rates are calculated. And so all of the non-exempt properties across the county are assessed. And then the total taxable value is established. And then the county's budget is divided by that total taxable value. And that's the property tax rate for all these non-exempt properties. And so if a piece of property becomes exempt, that means that they're not assessed and they're not placed into that total market or total taxable value calculation. And what the effect of that is that the value of that property is basically divvied up among all the other taxpayers in the county, and all the rest of the taxpayers in the county would pay their equitable portion of that particular property's taxable value. And so it doesn't affect Grand County's budget, but it does affect in general, the amount of property taxes that everybody else pays in the county. Any questions on that? Okay.
Thank you, Curtis. We would now like to turn the time over to Joette Langanese and Casey Cook to present their application.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks for the explanation. I think that was really important. And I also want to thank you all for taking the time again for this rehearing. Really appreciate it. I know you guys are very busy, so appreciate you taking the time. I want to introduce you to Casey, who happens to be right over here on my screen. She is the acting superintendent of the National Park Southeast Utah Group. She's been doing a fantastic job. Her leadership skills are just what the Park Service needs at this time. So I don't know, Casey, I wish that it was under different circumstances that you were with her and that you could meet her in person. We probably don't really want to get into your history, but if there's anything that you want to say to the council, you can.
Well, just thanks for inviting me to be part of this presentation. And Joette, I'm assuming that you'll make your part of the presentation first, and then I'll add some comments after you're done there. But I'm enjoying my time in Moab and Grand County very much. I have about 5 or 6 weeks left in my 4-month detail. Yeah, different circumstances would be good, but it's always good to be in and around Moab.
Great. Thanks, Casey. Glad you could join us today. Between the last meeting and now, I took the time to really provide a little bit more details based on the criteria and the guidelines that the county approved a few months ago. And so I provided you guys all with a letter that kind of detailed each of the 10 guidelines in a little bit more detail. I'm assuming that you've all had an opportunity to review those, my answers to those questions. And so today I really don't want to focus on that. I really would like to focus on the 3 areas that seem to be the most pertinent in your decision-making process. And those 3 areas is the property that the Friends owns used for charitable purposes. Is the lease amount determined? How is the lease amount determined? And is there a profit associated with the leasing of the property? And then last, does the property constitute something of value to the common good of the community? Or is it a gift that will lessen the government's burden? So I just would like to focus on those 3 issues, and please interrupt me if you have any questions. So is the property in question, which is 48 South, 400 East, is it used for a charitable purpose? And so just a little bit of a background. The Friends was founded in 2010 by the family of Bates Wilson. And for those of you who may not be aware, Bates Wilson was the superintendent of Arches National Park from 1949 to 1972. He was also very involved in the establishment of Canyonlands National Park and became its first superintendent. So his family felt like it was very important for an organization to step in and help the National Park Service Southeast Utah Group. And that also includes Natural Bridges and Hoven Week. And his family continues to serve on the board. 2 of his daughters are on our board. So his influence and his legacy, we want to continue on. So our organization was founded for the sole purpose of providing philanthropic and fundraising support to the National Park Service. That's what we do. We raise money. All of our funds, pretty much all of our funding comes from donations, foundations, and businesses. Our articles of incorporation makes it very clear that the Friends operates for the exclusive educational and charitable purpose to support the National Park Service. One of those purposes also allows the Friends to purchase and sell real estate. And this also supports the mission of the Park Service. And you need to understand, in order for a nonprofit to become a partner with the Park Service, it's not an easy process. I mean, it's very lengthy, detailed partnership agreement, which is in your packet. Our partnership agreement was 49 pages long. I only provided you with the agreement itself and not all the attachments, except for the annual work plan. And every year, the superintendent and my board meets to determine what it is we're going to fundraise for the following year. And we put that in a work plan. The regional Park Service office in Denver has to approve that plan. So it's not like any nonprofit can come out and become a partner of the Park Service. There's a process involved. Once in that work plan, it was identified, and if you looked at that plan, there's many programs and projects that we support the Park Service on. One of them is housing. And I can tell you that the Park Service has been asking us to help support them for employee housing since we were founded. In 2010, Kay Cannon, as the superintendent, said the biggest need, the primary need we have is housing. So in 2019, March of 2019, we had somebody approach us by offer to sell their house to us for employee housing. We were able to raise the money all through private donations, public donations, and we're able to purchase the house in March of 2019. We also put a deed restriction on it because we wanted to make sure that the use of the house is in perpetuity, that it runs with the land. So if for some reason the Friends ever went away, or we decided we wanted to sell the house, it would have to be used for public land, agency employee housing, Park Service employee housing, and beyond that, essential service housing for hospital staff and others. So I think that this owning this property and leasing it to the Park Service meets the Friends' charitable purpose of supporting the National Park Service Southeast Utah group. That's what we were founded for, and that's what we do. And how is this lease, next question is, how is this lease amount determined? And is there a profit associated with the leasing of the property? Just to be clear, and I don't know if this was confusion or not, but this property is leased directly to the Park Service. We do not we as the Friends group are not property managers, we're fundraising. The Park Service determines who gets to live in that house and how much they're going to charge rent. They do this through a very complicated IQMIS process that accumulates a lot of data and variables to come up with how much they can charge their employees for rent. And keep in mind, the whole purpose is to keep it affordable. I think these numbers have been adjusted a little bit. I did have a chance, Casey, to talk to Justin this morning.
Oh, good.
And so, but just to keep it clear, because you guys got another email from me, at the time when we were starting to work on how we would determine the lease and how much they were going to charge their tenants, it came, the report that they compiled said that they were going to charge their employees $182.50 a month. I think it's a little bit more than that now after they've done some recalculation, but at the time that was the number. That comes out to $2,007 a month. And the total annual amount is around $24,000. Again, those numbers are a little different, but they're not that much different. So based on these numbers and what we felt was reasonable, the Park Service and the Friends agreed that a long-term lease of $16,000 a year would be appropriate. And the reason for that income would be so that the Friends has some money to pay for the operating costs associated with home ownership. homeowner insurance, minor maintenance repairs, yard maintenance, pest control, all of those things comes out of the money that we get from the Park Service. So they don't have to do that, but we do because we own the property. And any additional funds left over, and there may be, go into a restricted account so that the Friends is able to have some money stashed away in order to prepare for major maintenance, new roof, new HVAC, new stucco on the house, new windows, those kind of major repairs that are always anticipated in home ownership. And as a small Friends group, we felt it was important for us to be able to have some money set aside in a restricted account that's solely for the use of maintenance for this house, major maintenance. So to date, I just want you to understand, in 2020 so far, the Friends has spent $6,290.42 on expenses for the house. We anticipate an additional 6,000 to 8,000 by the end of the year. So roughly we anticipate, and you never know, something bad could happen this year. I mean, this has been a bad year. So it's very likely that we may spend more than that, but we anticipate around $14,000, $12,000 to $14,000 in expenses to keep the house in good order. In 2019, we spent $18,820.21 in expenses associated with the property. And this was all donated money. This was not money that we generated from the Park Service or for rent or anything like that. This was money that we raised to help make sure that we could get this house ready for the tenants that the Park Service was going to be putting in the house. They have been living in the house since January. There's been some tenants there since January. There was also some resource management volunteers that lived there last year for a short time. And the lease that we have with the Park Service did not go into effect till March 1st of 2020. We did not require or expect any reimbursement from the Park Service prior to signing this lease agreement. And we continue to want to provide for the expenses of the maintenance. So that's the answer to question number 2. How did we determine the lease and how did amount and how do we determine the rent? Obviously, this is extremely affordable for our employees at the Park Service. And I think $16,000 for a 9-bedroom, 8-bathroom house is a pretty good deal. Does the property constitute something of value to the common good of the community? And, you know, I guess just step back for a minute. We are a nonprofit. We don't make a profit. That's not what we do. That's why we're a nonprofit. So even though we may generate a little bit of extra income from this lease agreement, again, it's going to a restricted fund that's solely being used to help support the Park Service in their housing. Last question. Does the property constitute something of value to the common good of the community or a gift that will lessen the government burden? This came up in the last meeting when Christina asked, how does this benefit how does this provide a gift? And honestly, I can't figure out the difference. I even went to dictionary and looked up the difference between gift and benefit. And so I found a better terminology is, does this constitute something of value to the common good of the community? And to address Chris Baird's explanation, the reason we have to provide that is because we are asking the community to take on the burden of our taxes being spread out amongst all property owners. So I think that's an important question that needs to be asked. And so I guess my answer to that question, I have a couple of ways to answer that question. But first of all, does it constitute something of value to the common good of the community? Yes. Park Service employees need to be there to effectively operate our parks. The Park Service has struggled for years to find adequate housing for their staff to meet the ever increasing demands due to the increase in visitation to our community and to our parks, and also the decrease of affordable housing. This is nothing that any of you don't already know. And as I said, they've been asking us since we were established, can you guys help us with affordable housing? We were finally able to do that. We raised the funds from private and public donors. We purchased the property solely for MPS employees. As you all also are aware, the Park Service is the driving economic force for Grand County, And by the Friends charitable purpose, we have allowed the Park Service to hire the staff that they need to maintain, effectively operate the parks in order for the community to prosper economically. Fortunately, this year, we can't count this year. But in the past and in the future, that same issue will be there. Having the park staff operating our Park Service is a huge value to the common good of this community. And I thought it was interesting because in your resolution, a case law was cited, Intermountain Healthcare and Utah County. And that case law generated the guidelines that you all just approved on how a nonprofit meets the charitable use. And Utah County actually also developed 4 questions to determine what constitutes a common good of the community. And I found those questions to be really helpful, and I thought they might be helpful for you all to measure if we really are providing to the common good of the community. The first question was, does an individual or group sacrifice for the welfare of the community? Example, the act of giving of itself. Yes, the Friends of Arches and Canyonlands Park was established solely to give back to the Park Service and to the community. We're the fundraising philanthropic partner. We provide a great service which benefits Grand County and the citizens through our fundraising and philanthropic efforts, and it helps the Park Service run our parks in our area. And because of this, I think we are enriching the community's experience, which also is a benefit to our community. So yes, we do provide the act of giving. Number 2, is it a service or a gift provided by public agency, federally, or in other states? Yes, the Park Service provides housing nationally. I think it's, I'm not sure all parks do that because all parks may not need staff, but the majority of the larger parks do provide housing on a national basis. So absolutely, this service or gift is provided by the Park Service and other federal agencies. Is it a service or a gift provided by charitable groups which suggests widespread recognition? Yes, there are several nonprofits in Grand County and Moab that provide affordable housing for their employees to meet their missions. Ricky is here to talk about her situation. In February of 2019, the Grand County Council approved a tax exempt request from Moab Regional Hospital for property being used to house their employees. And then we have the new Moab Land Trust that's also, their sole purpose is to build affordable housing for essential workers. And finally, the last question is the gift provided that could not otherwise be obtained by the beneficiaries without assistance from a nonprofit entity? Yes, of course. Without the assistance of the Friends, the Park Service would not be able to obtain affordable housing within the community of Grand County due to the high cost of housing and the shortage of available housing. These 4 questions that Utah County poses, you only need to answer one of them in order to be considered contributing something of the common good to the community or a gift to the community. Friends of Arches and Canyonlands Parks, we answered all 4. So I believe that shows that our use of the Bates Wilson Legacy Lodge, which is what we call it, is for charitable purpose and constitutes the value of common good for the community. And Casey, I don't know if you'd like to add anything.
Well, Joette, you covered it very well. I would just say a couple things. Now, I've been in the Park Service for a long time, and I've worked in a number of national parks that had Friends groups, and they are all different, but they are all focused on providing philanthropic support to that park, or in this case, a group of parks. And as Joette said, it's all fairly tightly prescribed by the agreement, and what a philanthropic partner can do to assist a national park kind of depends on what the park's needs are and what the capacity of the Friends group is. And I will say that this is an amazing relationship between the philanthropic partner and the park. I have never heard of a national park that had the support of its friends group to the tune of it purchasing housing for the employees. This is an issue. The need for housing exists at a lot of places in the national park system. And the idea that here in Moab, for Arches National Park and with the Friends of Arches and Canyonlands Parks as the philanthropic partner, that it's been pulled off is nothing less than incredible. The Friends group that I have for the 3 small national monuments I manage in Flagstaff, for them, a successful fundraising effort is to pull in $5,000 from a family foundation for an exhibit. So the idea that we have now access to an 11-bedroom house for employees is quite spectacular. And what I'll say a little bit about statistics there is, prior to the addition of this housing unit to help house our staff, we had 26 beds available at the Park Service housing units that are at Arches National Park. And with the addition of this 11-bedroom home, we now have 37 bed spaces available for Arches National Park. And that's a 42% increase. The Park Service could never have constructed an 11-bed housing unit within the park. So this is an impressive feat of partnership between the nonprofit philanthropic partner and the National Park Service. And, again, in terms of gift to the community, I would argue that the Friends are supporting, the highest priority need of a huge economic engine for Moab and the Grand County area, and that's Arches National Park. So the Park Service does an economic benefit report every year. We don't have the one for 2019 yet, but the one for 2018 had the following information related to Arches National Park. 1.7 million park visitors spent an estimated $2 million in local gateway regions while visiting Arches National Park. And these expenditures supported a total of 3,080 jobs, $144 million in value added, and that's a dollar being spent a number of times, and $263 million in economic output. So, that's a substantial support to the National Park Service that provides quite a lot of energy to the economic engine of the area. And most gateway communities, I think, would consider their nearby national parks to be a gift, both to the nation and their community. And so by extension, the Bates Wilson Legacy Lodge purchased by the Friends is also a gift in that it supports the park's ability to provide the experience and the services that draw so many people here.
Great. Thanks, Casey. Does anybody have any questions for me?
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
First is probably to Casey to answer. Do the employees pay, or is the housing part of their compensation package? How does that work?
It depends on what type of employee they are. We have volunteers and interns who are not paying directly. The National Park Service subsidizes their opportunity to live there. But for employees who are true National Park Service employees paid by the agency and working as federal employees, they pay rent on a biweekly basis. So twice a month, their salaries are docked that amount for the rent. And it includes calculation for the utilities as well. So if it's a volunteer that lives there, the Park Service has volunteer funds that then we basically pay ourselves in that case. So it's money from one account to another. But if it's a paid employee, then those, and most of those are, I think the folks that are there right now those folks are paying rent to the National Park Service.
And then Joette, to you, what else does the Friends do other than provide this workforce housing?
We do youth education programs. The National Park Service, we have underserved kids coming from Salt Lake, from the Pueblo of the Acoma, from the Latinos in Action. We reach out to diverse population youth and get them connected to the park. We also support volunteer stewardship program that through the Park Service, they actually run the volunteer stewardship program. We provide funding for that and help recruit volunteers. We are very involved in the Moab Dark Skies initiative and have been involved in the creation of the ordinances that both the city and the county just approved last year. And right now we're working with the community to provide assistance in helping them retrofit their lighting. So we have funds available to help with that. And we also are involved with the Park Service Search and Rescue to help them do their training every year. And then the house. And let's see, I probably missed something, but
Pretty good list. That's all I have. for
yeah,
questions.
so yeah, we do a lot for a small organization.
Any other questions? Yes, Jalen. Jalen, did you have a question? You're on mute.
Yes, I do. And I was trying to get my documents up. These first two are really for procedure, or maybe not procedure, but just to clarify a few things for me that probably should have been asked of the county attorney before the presentations, but I will go ahead and ask them now. First of all, I think it's important to clarify who is the beneficiary, because in both cases, there are potentially two groups of beneficiaries, and I think that some of the answers to these questions that we're wrestling with would be different depending on who we're defining as the beneficiary. For instance, in the Park Service's case, there is, of course, the Park Service. They're a definite beneficiary of this, and also the staff that is housed there would be another beneficiary. So I think it's important to define that. I don't know if you can touch on that a little bit, Christina. If so, I'll stop and ask my next question in a minute.
No, I think it's a great question, and I have those same questions myself. I don't think that the case law supports Grand County providing a tax exemption that benefits the federal government. And so that's something the council is going to have to make a finding on, is who is the recipient. And it needs to, for the tax exemption to pass, it needs to flow to the individuals, these interns. But that's a good
Okay.
question.
All right, my second question is, I want to understand more about the restricted versus non-restricted requirement, how that fits in. Does one make it more likely that the tax exempt request would be granted versus the other?
No, I don't think it does. So all of these, and the case law is very clear that these exemptions, it's what's called a balancing test, not a bright line test. And so you don't need to answer yes or no, you just need to consider each one. So here the restriction is that these folks need to work for the Park Service, and that restriction is important to support the Friends mission.
Okay.
But, an unrestricted could be affordable housing for the entire community. And that's a whole different analysis. So no, one answer is not better than the other. It's case by case.
Okay. Thank you. Then for Joette. So we've already established that the recipients for housing, so the occupants need to work for the Park Service or National Park in the area. Is that correct?
The deed restriction has several, is that what you're referring to, Jalen, the deed restriction? Or, I mean,
no, I realize the deed restriction is pretty wide open as far as essential workforce housing. But the fact that it's leased to the Park Service, to me, would dictate that it would be Park Service employees that would benefit by this.
yes, yes. However, with that in mind, if the Park Service had empty rooms and say the Forest Service was looking, they had a seasonal that came in for the winter and there was a room available, the Park Service can certainly consider renting to them.
Okay.
That's up to them.
Okay, thank you. And did have a few more. It's hard switching back and forth documents. So Joette, who would you say was the recipient of this charitable act?
As in terms of the beneficiaries?
Right.
Absolutely the employees,
Okay,
in my mind, because they wouldn't, if they couldn't find a place to live, they wouldn't be here. And in fact, I know there's been staff that they've hired who started looking at the housing market and said, ugh, never mind, I don't want to live here. I go someplace else.
right. Okay, now you've listed $16,000 as the rental, well, the lease paid by the Park Service to Friends. In the documents that you provided, there was a document titled, let me find my question, titled Solicitation Contract Order for Commercial Items that lists $20,000 rather than 16,000. Can
Right.
you explain that difference?
Yes, and getting contracts through the park is complicated. And so we determined that we're gonna have a long-term contract, a 20-year contract with the Park Service starting next year. In the interim, we had to put in a short-term 364-day short-term contract, which really we have to do everything. We have to pay everything. And so the park agreed to give us an additional $4,000 in order for us to actually be the tenants and pay all the utilities and that kind of thing. So there was just an additional expense by doing a short-term lease for this year, but starting next year when we are going to take a year to come up with a long-term agreement, that will reduce back down to the 16,000. And then there's an opportunity to also renegotiate it to a lower rate. I don't think the Friends Group really needs to make any more money. So 16,000 is the amount that we intend to have for the long term.
Okay. I don't remember if the P&L you provided was for 2019. Oh, there it is, 2019 or 2020, but it does list January through April 2020. It does list 20,000 in other income. Does that include the 16,000 for the
Yes.
lease?
Yes.
Okay. And then also on that same profit and loss budget overview, it lists as an expense, National Park housing as $11,000.
Correct.
That's correct. Okay. So
Yeah.
theoretically, you might have $5,000
Right.
to play
And you
with. I
understand,
know.
yeah, you understand that when you project your budget, we had no idea what our expenses were going to be once we have a full house.
Right. Yeah, I do understand.
We were conservative. And so that's why there's that 11,000.
Okay, let me see if there are any other questions I have for you. That looks like it's it. I just want to say that I think it's terrific that you were able to not only find this house, but also find the money, the donations, the donors to be able to purchase it. I think that's terrific, and it makes a small dent in some of the housing issues here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jaylyn. Appreciate that.
Any other questions? Christina, do you think we should discuss the Arches and Canyonland, Friends of Arches and Canyonlands application? Or should we listen to the Moab Community Rebuild and then discuss all three?
That is my recommendation, is to take in the evidence from all three and then deliberate. You're not obligated to deliberate directly after, but with that said, I'd like to hear the council weigh in, because if they feel like the facts are fresher now and they'd rather deliberate now, then we can do that as well.
Gabriel, do you want to deliberate now, or would you like to wait?
I would prefer to deliberate personally, because in following the advice of legal counsel and my own ability to deliberate and discuss on the other two items. I would prefer to deliberate on this now and actually vacate the meeting.
That's a good point. To include Gabriel, we should deliberate now on the Friends matter.
Okay, deliberate now.
So what my recommendation is for Mary, you to guide the BOE through the guidelines. I do recommend the community benefit, which a lot of the guidelines are geared toward, I think is much easier to meet. The community gift aspect is harder. For the applicants, the information after doing, about 20 more hours of research on tax exemption law in Utah, the cases come down to two elements of what constitutes a community gift. And one is a substantial imbalance between the charity recipient and the organization. And so again, who is the recipient here is going to be crucial. And an alleviation of a government burden. Those are the two questions that the majority of the case law since 1985, there was a strict construence of tax exemption case law early in the 1900s. Then it became this sort of big flexible thing where everyone got it. And then in the 1980s, they tightened it back down and it's been strictly construed ever since. So these two questions have guided all of the case law's analysis of community gifts since then. And in terms of the government burden, there is no case law that tells us that a federal burden is our problem, right? So I just want to keep that in mind. That doesn't mean that this council can't decide that it wants to support the federal government, but it needs to make that finding. We, of course, are a subdivision of the state, and the policy, which is robustly discussed in a lot of these case law, the whole policy behind this tax exemption and requiring other people to handle the tax burden is that the state benefits from this gift. And that state benefit in every single case is addressed at a county or a state level. There's no federal government gift component. So, and for me, those are the two that are tricky here and that we need to discuss thoroughly. But I would like you to start with the guidelines. And the last question on the guidelines is the gift question.
Yes. I will read the question and then refer to each board member to ask you if you feel like the Friends of Arches and Grand Canyonlands has met this criteria or this guideline. Number one, whether the purpose of the organization and the use of the subject property is to provide a significant service to others without immediate expectation of material reward. Does anyone want to lead on giving their thoughts on this, or should I just call on you each individually?
I can go ahead and lead off here. What I, where I see this is the health of the tourist economy, which obviously benefits the state and the county, relies on the healthy operation of the parks, which relies on healthy and happy employees. And the fact that the county isn't looked at to, the Friends is providing all of the maintenance and the lease agreements and the management of this property for these employees. The fact that the county doesn't have to engage in that at all, I would, in my mind, answers that in the affirmative.
Jaylyn, do you have?
I'm just trying to find my notes. So you could move on while I look, I guess.
Okay, Curtis. You're muted, Curtis.
So just a quick question on process real quick. And I'm just refreshing my agenda here. So is this really necessary to go through line by line and question each council member? I mean, can we get a motion on the floor? And if someone, wants to get into a specific, point, or, I mean, I've never seen a meeting handled like this for the sake of time. And for instance, if there's not the support of the county council, do we need to spend an hour going through this, walking each council member individually through this?
We have to create findings. And so someone could present findings for adoption or not, for consensus or not. But absent someone being prepared to do that, this is one way to do it. I don't think we need to ask every single person. I think that we need to discuss the guidelines and summarize where we are, and if there's a consensus or not, we need to figure that out. But it's a hearing. It's an administrative hearing. So we have to, by statute, create findings, and we have to, by statute, create a written decision. So it's you missed the hearing opening, but it is a quasi judicial administrative hearing. So it is run differently than your typical, council agenda.
It's probably the first time we've had a hearing of this nature. So we need to come up with a finding. We have to say they did not meet the criteria because.
Or they did because. Either way, we need findings.
Can we proceed that way? So start with those that make a finding that, in support of, give them an opportunity to share that, give those that disagree with that, counter that. And then once we finish with that, folks can make an argument of why they don't meet, check one of the boxes. As opposed to pulling teeth line by line.
Do you want to kick it off? Do it.
Well, I would rather the folks that have a finding in support of go first, to be honest with you.
So you've just said that you are not in support, is what I'm hearing.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so do you have a finding to support that?
Well, so yeah, if you guys, you're going to make me lead, then okay. So I guess, and this may not be a finding, but I didn't follow this specifically when this was coming up, when Christina asked Joette who the beneficiary was, and she said the employees. So I disagree with that. The Park Service is the beneficiary, in which Joette made the case that they struggle to maintain or gain employees because of the housing situation. So at the end of the day, the Park Service is the beneficiary of subsidized housing. And in that case, the county would be increasing stress on all the remaining property taxpayers to the benefit of the federal government. That's sufficient?
Yes. Does that, Christina?
Yeah, that goes to the community gift. Do you want to say anything about whether there's community benefit? And just so you know, a lot of the case law, there's a lot more case law that finds against the exemption, because taxable property is the presumption. And there's a lot of narrative that says, hey, these people, they're a great organization. They create all this community benefit. It's a wonderful group, but it doesn't rise to the gift. And therefore we're denying the exemption. So you touched on the community gift as failing. Do you want to touch on community benefit?
Well, I mean, that can go a number of directions. I mean, a nonprofit taking housing inventory off the market for the benefit of the federal government also increases stress on housing stock for county employees or non-federal workers. And so there's an argument there. The Park Service plays a major role economically in the community, and so there's probably some arguments there. But for me, it's not a matter of if they're doing good things, but does the federal government, are they entitled to or deserving of a basically a gift from the county property taxpayers that increases the amount their share of the property taxes? Is that's the issue for me. So that's all.
Thank you.
I can work with that for findings.
Gabriel, do you have anything?
Just echo kind of what I mentioned before. I do, my findings are in favor. I do see this very much as a gift in terms of the spirit and the characteristic, part of the spirit and the character and the definition of the town and the economy here. Relies on the parks being here and functioning properly, and so it's not just like an added bonus, or I don't see it limited. I see it as being essential. In other words, vital and essential role to the well-being of our community, which is directly tied to our economy.
So let me focus you a little bit, Gabriel. We have to find, in order to pass the exemption, the county has to find that there's a government burden that's being alleviated. So is your government burden workforce housing? And just so you know, the Utah Supreme Court has, in every instance, rejected a tax exemption for working aged able-bodied people. Now, again, we can create our own purposes here. And so there's still a discretionary legislative role here. But we have to make that finding that we, as the Board of Equalization, find that workforce housing is a government burden. Other government burdens would be education. Joette did mention an educational component. I don't have a good sense of how robust the educational services they provide. The other thing to keep in mind is the case law on the education. It's related to traditional educational services that act and look like traditional public education services. Does this qualify? That's up for you guys, but you would need to make a finding that this workforce housing is a governmental burden, or the educational services they provide. Education, by the way, clearly a government burden, right, under Utah law, but do their educational services qualify? And the other thing I want to bring up too, because I know, Joette mentioned the hospital, and I know that's going to come up. And in full disclosure, I represent the hospital in my private practice, and I did that years ago. But the hospital too, 100 years of case law protecting small nonprofit hospitals. So that's already been determined as a government burden. So the county, I wouldn't say, and that was before I was sworn in, I wouldn't say the county did a great job making findings on MRH's application, but there was already a government burden that's been established for 100 years, which is hospitals. So there didn't need to be a workforce housing burden established. Here, I think there does. So I think for the county to pass the exemption, you guys need to make a finding about workforce housing being essential and an essential element of what the government should be providing to its citizens.
Yeah, so on that, if I may, Mary, I mean, the other component to this too is a lot of these discussions are taking place insinuating or assuming that we're going to have a workforce housing problem indefinitely, and we're not, in my opinion. Between the projects in the city, the affordable housing overlay, private projects, the land trust, we are in a position to exceed the county's own housing goals by more than double in the next 2 to 3 years. And so the precedent that we would set, by granting these tax exemptions in the name of housing crunch, if that's essentially how it's being pitched, is lacking some foresight and understanding of where we're going to be, and where we're going in towards of workforce housing. And so it's not a compelling, that alone is not a compelling argument to kind of set this precedent. So.
Well, I could speak to mine. I've read over these documents a number of times and have weighed as to whether or not this is a gift to the community. Grand County or Moab, Utah is unique in the fact that we are so very isolated, that we do not have a community close to us to help alleviate with housing. Our housing is expensive. I feel we will create more affordable housing, but the truth of the matter that in a resort community of this nature, housing prices remain high. It's consistent in Aspen, it's consistent in the gateway communities outside of all of our major parks throughout the nation, outside of Yellowstone Park, every place where people want to be because of the access to the national parks and to the beauty. And in those areas, almost all communities have access to where people can commute. Grand County does not have that. I feel that to quote the Arches County National Park is a driving economic force for the economy of Grand County. Without adequate housing, the national park staffs would not be able to fill the positions and keep our parks functioning at a high enough level to keep people coming here. And because of that, I think they are providing a gift that if they were not providing it, at some point I feel that we would be looking at another way to provide it so that we could keep the employees in place. They've answered that question and all the questions, all 10, when you read through them, all 10, they answered in the affirmative, that yes, this is. And so I truly believe that this is a gift to the community and that they have met the criteria for a tax exempt.
Okay, so Mary, I need you to make a finding on workforce housing, and you could do it generally and say workforce housing is a government burden. Or you could say it, you can narrow it, workforce housing for Arches and Canyonlands, or for our national parks, or for our parks, or to serve our public lands, or anything you want. But we need a finding, because so far there's nothing that supports an exemption for workforce housing in law. So we need to make that finding.
Mary, this is Greg. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Did you want me to comment?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just like to say I kind of agree with Kurt on this. That to me, I mean, the gift is to the federal government. This is a responsibility of the federal government. If they're going to have workforce, then they need to provide housing for them. They have some housing in the park, but evidently they don't have enough. There's ways to remedy to that. They can bring in temporary facilities or whatever, but it's their responsibility. I don't see that it's the taxpayers of the county to subsidize the federal government. So that's my comment.
Christine, or I have a question real quick. Point 9, whether the nonprofit organization provides a service that the government would otherwise have to perform.
Right.
Who are we talking about when we say government? We
Yeah,
talking about state or federal or local?
So the county is a political subdivision of the state. And so all of the case law is directed at a county burden or a state burden. There's not a single case out there that supports alleviating a burden of the federal government and shouldering it on the, taxpayers.
So 9, I don't see what the argument it is that this request meets 9. So that, I mean, essentially that's saying,
Well,
if Friends of Arches didn't provide this service, the state or the county would have to provide housing for the federal government workers, which
Right,
is
so
false.
that's why we need if the consensus is that, and we need to hear from Jay Lane because it sounds like we're 2-2 so far. If the consensus is for the exemption, we need to make a finding that the recipients are the interns themselves, not the federal government. And we need to make a finding that workforce housing, restricted or not to the federal government, to the parks, whatever we want to do, is a service that the government would have to perform. There's a lot in the case law as well that says, hey, communities are allowed to decide what charitable purpose looks like inside their community. But this is an automatic exemption under the Constitution if they qualify. There's nothing in Utah law that shows us they qualify, in my opinion, without us making those exact findings.
Jay Lynn.
I was hoping to hear Mary
Okay,
comment on her findings for Christina first, and then I would be happy to comment.
I'm organizing my thoughts. In a sense, we are the federal government. We are a division. The county is a division of the federal government. But we all are members of the United States of America. And in this situation, as we know, so many of our federal institutions are not funded to the point that they should be. We are hurt by that every year because of the PILT money. We as a county experience not receiving enough funding through payment in lieu of taxes. And as a county, I do not see that the Park Service is any different from the county, that they are not provided, just like we are not provided with the funds to meet all the needs that we have in the county. And the state parks are in the same situation. They are under the same crunch financially because they are not receiving the funds that would give them the opportunity to adequately provide the needs for the county, for their employees and for the community. Arches and Canyonlands are important to Grand County because they are our driving force. They are what has attracted and allowed us to move from an extraction when the uranium mines fell apart and closed. The parks were what kept Grand County alive and Moab alive. So with that in mind, it is essential that we have the parks managed in a way that enables us to continue having people desire to come and spend time in our parks. And for that to happen, the parks must be adequately staffed. And if they cannot be adequately staffed, we are choosing to not support something that is an economic driver. And I think rather that in the long run, if we would do what we needed to do as a county to keep the parks functioning well. And if that meant later on providing housing or finding a way that they're, or campsites or whatever we would to keep them functioning, we would do that as a county, because the workforce in the parks is so important. Without the people working the parks would not continue to be the gifts that they are to the community. And just as Arches is a gift to Grand County, the people that work in the parks on many ways provide a gift to Grand County. And therefore, I believe that we would have a need to find a way to keep the park staffed adequately, and would find a need to provide workforce housing. Therefore, it is my finding that it is important for us to support park and the people that are working and volunteering in the park, and many of them are volunteering or working at very, very low wages that could not afford to find housing or rent in Grand County. And with that said, I think that providing workforce housing, and we're not providing it. That's the great thing about it. This nonprofit organization is providing the housing, not us. And that's a blessing.
Really?
And therefore, the spreading of the approximately $1,800 to all the taxpayers in Grand County does not produce much of a burden at all on each individual, but it provides a great benefit to the community because it helps keep employees in the community that are needed to keep the park functioning at a high level. So
Okay,
therefore,
I'd like to summarize your findings for Jalen, if that's appropriate.
I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. So I want to make sure you're comfortable with this. Your finding would be that workforce housing to support the federal parks located in Grand County is a government burden. The Park Service employees, including the interns and volunteers, are the recipients of the charity. And by charity, we mean the charitable use of this property. And the rent that those Park Service employees pay of approximately $182 per month constitutes a substantial imbalance between the recipient and the organization. And the Friends group and the charitable use of this property provides community benefit for all the reasons you said. Are you comfortable with those findings, Mary?
Yes.
Okay. Jalen, what do you think?
Okay. So I'll try to answer this is so hard to organize. I wish I'd had another day to prepare, or even another 2 hours. Get my right papers open. Okay, I will try to address the gift first. Is it a gift to the national parks? Definitely. Is it a gift to the occupants, the successful, lucky occupants that get to live there? Definitely. Is it a gift to the community? I'm going to have to say no, and in fact, it could be construed to be a burden. You may say that, I don't know what the taxes on the property were. I think I looked at one point and the former owner may have paid $1,200 or $1,400. I don't recall. Spread out over all the taxpayers is not a significant burden. But if you look at the nearly 400 line items in an Excel spreadsheet of tax exempt parcels in our county, it's a huge burden to add, to add one more to those. It's actually 378 line items. And I will speak to the benefit of the community in terms of the parks being an economic driver. They're definitely an economic driver. However, they have been an economic driver for the last lots of years, and they've done so without assistance in housing up until this past year from the county. And from nonprofits, good nonprofits such as Friends of Arches and Canyonlands. They experienced double-digit growth figures in visitations over, I would dare say, the last 10 years, but I'd have to double check that fact. So let's see. In terms of, is it a burden of government to provide housing? I would like to refer back to the Utah Supreme Courts that have found government burden to be caring for the sick and the poor, education of poor children, caring for the indigent and insane and helpless orphans, and affordable housing for low-income, elderly, and handicapped people. The group that is being benefited by this don't fit in any of those categories. So no, I would find we don't, in this case, have a burden to provide housing if the Park Service and Friends were not doing it. And then I feel like when you read through the stated purposes of Friends, providing housing is peripheral to those stated purposes. It's certainly useful, but it was not, at least as I'm reading their articles of incorporation and bylaws, it was not a definite spelled out, we do this purpose. I'm just going down the list now. They are, of course, entirely supported by donations and gifts. On whether the recipients of the charity are required to pay for the assistance received, of course they are. So if we're talking about them as a recipient of the charity, they are of course paying for that. And if you're talking about the Park Service, they of course are paying for that as well. Income received, I'm sure they don't produce a profit in their nonprofit. So I just wrote a very short paragraph before we heard these at council meeting, before we mistakenly heard them at council meeting. I said this property does not appear to meet the test that use is exclusively charitable, serving the common good. It serves a specific group of people, park employees, and thus misses serving the common good. Also, it serves, I put 8, sounds like it serves 11 people at a time, and all other residents needing reduced rental costs must help pick up the tab, not only for themselves through higher payments to a landlord, but in the event the property was granted tax exempt status, they pick up the tab for those park employees as well. Since the tax burden does not go away, it is spread across all the remaining taxpayers. Property taxes, in my mind, are a reasonable part of O&M, operation and maintenance, and it would be unfair to burden the rest of the property owners with this tax bill when the property in question benefits a specific group. Instead, I would suggest charging the beneficiaries about $15 more per month so that enough is collected to pay the property tax. And in this case, it sounds like the lease to the Park Service would just need to be increased by a small amount to be able to pay the taxes. I think that's all I have. Unless you have questions, Christina, what didn't I answer?
No, that was really great and thorough. So I'm just trying to summarize your findings, because what we need to do, it sounds like we're ready to go ahead and sort of reach a consensus, and then I can write the decision for your adoption. Sounds like we're gonna have a special meeting next week, so that worked out well timing wise. So what I got is the Friends have failed to show a community gift. There's a finding that workforce housing is not a government burden. The primary beneficiary of the charity, and again, that's the charitable use of this property, is the Park Service. That's documented by the lease. It's also documented by MPS's priority to find housing. In addition, the park could build more housing inside the park. There also, while the Friends group generally provides programming that constitutes community benefit, housing is peripheral to the mission of Friends. That while the Park Service itself does play a major economic role, we're talking about the federal government, not Friends, and park visitation has grown without this workforce housing through the last number of years. That this charity, the charitable use of this or exclusive use of this property benefits not the community as a whole and not the common good, but a specific group of employees. And I can probably come up with some more after playing it back, but I think those are the highlights that I'd include in a decision.
There are a couple more points
Okay.
that we missed. And Mary's finding, she, number 9, declared that the county as a subdivision of the state somehow is a part of the federal government, which is false, which is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. This Constitution gives the states numerous and indefinite powers. It gives the federal government enumerated powers that are exclusive to the federal government. So that is not correct. The other issue here is in the counties, and I don't know which point you attribute to this, but this is probably the most critical point that I want to make. In the county's affordable housing studies and our plan, we attribute the affordable housing crisis and the crunch of housing to a lack of developable land. And specifically, it outlines the small share of private land in the county, which is somewhere between 4% and 6%. So in this case, with approximately 95% of the land in the county that you cannot develop housing on is owned by the federal government. And so in some ways, this is the federal government asking the county to subsidize housing because there's this housing crunch, which we have identified as a county council, that is in turn a problem that's created by a lack of developable land caused by federal ownership of 95% of the county's land. So that's got to fit in there somewhere.
Yep, I can add that. Okay, we'll have to, we don't have to, make a formal decision now. I cannot condense this into language where we can do so right now. So I'm going to get back to you about when and how we do that. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Curtis, Greg, and Jay Lynn support denying the tax exemption.
Yes.
Okay.
Joette, did you want to say something?
Yeah, do I have an opportunity to rebut some of your decisions?
You're not really supposed to once we recess your presentation, but it's up to BOE if they want to allow that.
If we've reached consensus, we're an hour and a half in and we have 2 more items. My preference is to continue on with our business.
So I would like to ask Christina if there's a way for us to get a copy of your, the findings of facts that are also conclusive with the law, so that when we file our appeal with the Utah Tax Commission, that we have all that information?
Of course, that'll be the written decision that you are entitled to by May 1, on or before May 1.
And so I think the rule is we have 30 days to appeal after.
30 days from the date of our decision, written decision.
So that would be 30 days from today.
No, 30 days from the written decision.
Oh, so from the time I get it back from you guys, I have 30 days. Great. Thank you.
Do-
Go ahead, Mary.
Just to interrupt, Mary, may I?
Yes,
Just Christina, if I have anything sort of else to add to the conversation with regards to finding in my own sort of personal, or I mean my own finding, even though it's obviously at this point not going to affect the ultimate decision, I'll present those to you in writing.
Okay.
And I think that I'm going to leave the meeting now.
Thank
thank
you.
you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Friends of Arches and Canyonlands for all the work you do. And I'm sure even the council members who chose not to support this tax exempt recognize the benefit and the gifts that your organization provides. And thank you very much.
Welcome. And just so the council knows, Steve Russell, my spouse, is representing Community Rebuilds. He's going to be taking my place, and his name is not Joette Langanese, but that's the name that you're going to see on the screen. And I'm going to put him on mute, so he might fumble around with this.
Hello,
Okay, Ricky, are you with us?
can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. Hi,
All right.
Steve. Thanks for
Hi.
joining.
Yes.
you're
Thank
welcome.
Oh, no.
That was the longest 10 minutes I've ever sat through.
Oh,
So are we moving on to community rebuilds?
We're moving on to item B, which is, let me grab it here. Item B, administrative hearing on executive use property tax exemption request for 501c3 organization Community Rebuild regarding real property known as 150 South 200 East, Moab, Utah, pursuant of Utah Statute 59-2-1102. Ricky Epperson and Steve Russell. Thank you.
Thank you, and
Hi.
I'm just here to assist. Ricky's going to carry the ball. If I can help you out in any way, I will. And if I may, just at the beginning, Ricky, let you know, I have communicated with Ms. Sloan. You've seen my letter. I have gone through the tax exemption guidelines. There's 10 of them. I think it's important to remember by your own guidelines that you will evaluate each case on its own facts, may weigh the criteria differently, and need not make a finding of qualification under every factor in order to approve. My review of the situation is that the rebuild does meet all 10 factors, but you don't need to find that. And there's a Utah State Supreme Court decision, Jorgensen. You may not all have read it, but I'm sure that Ms. Sloan has, which lists 6 factors that are determinative, and I believe Community Rebuilds meets all of those as well. So, however you want to.
Do we have those 6 criteria?
They're in a legal decision that I'm sure Ms. Sloan has.
Yeah, the 6 criteria that Steve's talking about in Jorgensen were actually created in the 1985 Utah County case. And those 6 are included in our 10 BOE guidelines, but there's additional case law in addition, especially as to the gift. So that's why we have more. So we have the 6 plus more.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, I'll just start with my presentation. I tried to mix it up from last time just so we don't get bored. I'm going to share my screen with you and hope it works. Oh, what? Screen sharing has failed. Let's try that again.
We can see you.
I'm trying to share a screen share a document.
Oh,
I tested it earlier, but let's see here. I wonder why it would fail. That's just like the way things are going these days, huh? We rely so much on technology. When we need it the most, it's not our best friend. Well, I don't think if you guys all have your packet and can refer to the 2 documents that I sent supplementally per the advice of Christina Sloan, it goes over the property usages. Can everybody find those by chance? If not, let me try one more time, because I also decided to just screen share them with you because I thought it would be most effective if I could cursor around. Oh my gosh, here it comes. Yay. Here we are. Now, can you see a document that says property overview?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm just going to walk you quickly through the properties because it's kind of confusing, and there's a lot of different, things happening, and there are 2 different properties. They're neighboring each other. If you see in the colorful diagram, it's the parcels that are numbered and outlined in red. So one's a flag lot and one is on the 200 East frontage. We consider both properties our campus. That is its main use. 140 South, 200 East has 1 dwelling. It's a 4-unit building. There's 2 rooms per unit. 1 unit is solely used as our administrative workspace. The other 3 units provide housing for community rebuilds apprentices, interns, and vistas. The property also contains storage sheds for community rebuilds materials. And then the other property, the larger one in the back, 150 South, has 2 dwellings, an 8-room dormitory, which houses our building intern students that we call the bunkhouse, and then a 3-bedroom house we call the cottage that houses YGP interns and community rebuilds campus groundskeeper. The larger property is definitely used for our workshops and for our semesters, and has a lot of storage for our tools and building materials. So there's another map just below that first page that kind of designates exactly what the uses are. So does anyone have any questions about that? Just because I have received some questions based on how it looks on our application versus how it really looks when we've got a bird's eye view of it. Good, moving on. Okay. I have also included the community rebuilds rental structure. So persons that may utilize the housing on community rebuilds campus when available, because most of it is used, for community rebuilds interns and apprentice builders that are temporary, and kind of a graduates program of our internship. But when we do have vacancy, and when we did see that we had vacancy, we were able to collaborate with Youth Garden Project, who has struggled for housing as every entire entity in our community has. And so that we're on our 2nd term of leasing rooms to them. The pricing structure is set for everybody. It's all the same unless they're unpaid, which I said the majority of people living on our campus are unpaid and not paying for their rooms. But the few that are paying, it's $225 per bed in a shared room, or it's $450 for a private room. And then we did give a discount to anyone who, like the temporary apprentice or the Vista, who is working with us. We gave them $100 off for a $350 a month rent. And this includes everything: rent, utilities, Wi-Fi, trash, and recycling. And then I included a little fair market rent documentation system list for 2019 and 2020. That's from HUD. So there's that. And if you'll scroll down to page, I think we're on page 4.
Can you scroll down with what you're doing?
I
Or-
am, yeah. Is it not working?
No, it's only on the first property overview.
Okay, I'm moving down. Maybe I need to click on it. Did that work?
No.
Well, I actually don't have too much. I have a lot of Zoom experience, but I haven't shared screens. So I'm not sure why it wouldn't work. I did a test and it was working earlier with my coworker. This is a huge bummer. Well, my next, you guys do have those documents though, Christina. I got them in time and they've all been mailed out to you. So it's 2 maps of the property. It's the map of, or it's the rent structure and the fair housing market prices, which we are completely way below, because those don't even include utilities and things. And then the third one, or the fourth one I wanted to show you was our profit and loss, just so that you have that, because that's something that we haven't.
If you're hunting for the documents, they are on page 71, 72, and 73 of your 131 packet, if you're hunting for them. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I imagine you guys will probably be deliberating too, so you can look them over and let me know if you have any questions. But we do have a rental structure. It is way below market value, and I included all the documents that were recommended there. But this one I'm going to pull up. You haven't seen officially, and so hopefully this works. Are you seeing an Excel sheet now?
Yes.
Great. So this is our expenses for housing for 2019. We do anticipate, we've already seen the due to peak season use, which I guess Moab, our programs, I mean, all of our seasons are peak except for January, has given us about a 20% increase on utilities. So we're definitely concerned about 2020's numbers. But this is what we've spent on utilities, supplies, for maintenance, trash and recycling. There's taxes and insurance, and then management just for the groundskeeper and the admin for managing the few leases and tenants that we do carry unrelated to our program. So the total expenses for the 2 properties, the 3 dwellings, is $36,000 and some change from last year. And the income we received, a good portion of that from YGP. It's about 69% from YGP. Totals this $18,000. So we're definitely operating at a loss for the housing that we provide. And we're looking to try to make those numbers get closer together. Does anyone have any questions about this while I have this Excel sheet open? I have the individual reports from 2019 on each tab here.
I have, just to clarify that number you just gave us, YGP is paying 69% of the expenses, or are they 69% of the income you receive?
Exactly, the former, 69% of the income we receive.
Okay. That's all I got. Thanks.
Ricky, do you have just a total profit loss for CR that you can share with us? It includes all of your expenses. So what you just said, you're operating on a loss for housing. So this spreadsheet specifically is just related to the property we're discussing, correct?
just the expenses and the income for housing. I was going to go into our funding a little bit later in our program here, but I can talk to you about our funding if you'd like.
No, if you're planning to go over it, just go.
Well, I mean, we
please
can,
continue.
let's just do it right now. So this, yeah, this is literally just expenses to run the housing units and anything surrounded that. This like insurance number or tax, that has nothing to do with like our organizational or program insurance or anything like that. This is strictly tied a P&L that I've created just for housing. And I know that the income that we do receive has been questioned, and I just wanted to go over that to show that we are definitely operating at a loss. We have to seek a lot of additional funding to cover these housing programs that we have created. And the YGP thing is mutually beneficial because they really needed housing, and we had some vacancy. And so this was all kind of discussed before I was the executive director with our previous executive director and the board of the Youth Garden Project. But we're definitely giving them a fair, we're reserving that house for them for when they need it, so that they don't have to struggle to find a 9-month lease or a 4-month lease for the different interns that they have coming and going. And we do charge them a monthly rate while it's occupied, but if you spread that out, throughout the year, it's about $1,100 with all utilities included for a month. And what else was I going to say?
Do you have a lease with them or a MOU, or what's the arrangement?
I do have a lease with them, and we've just done 2 of them now. So we did one last year and executed that, and then we have just begun the one for this year a couple months ago, and we hope to continue if we can.
So are you doing that on a year-by-year basis or long-term?
Yeah, that's about all we can commit to right now, just because we're there, if we do need the bedrooms in order to fulfill our mission, we have that obligation, to do that. At one point we had the entire 140 filled with building the bunkhouse. So it's hard to say where our programming will go. And we applied for an AmeriCorps state grant. So we're hoping to utilize a lot of those for our programming as well.
And I know this is in there, but will you just clarify? So for 150 South, 200 East, that includes the cottage that YGP rents. How many, I guess we should say beds, like how many beds are in the cottage versus the bunkhouse?
Let me go. I have this all kind of written down just because I want to make sure I don't. So you just want to talk about 150 East though, or as a whole?
The YGP thing is somewhat problematic, and so we're gonna have to create special findings about it. And so I need to explore it a little bit so I can advise them.
So there are, this is really easy math, 16 in the bunkhouse beds and 7 in the cottage. One of them in the cottage is our groundskeeper, so that's for CR purposes.
Okay.
And it's so that's 7 plus 16, 23.
Got it.
Yeah. So
Okay.
23.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say too. So it's 1,100 on average per month for 6 interns, depending on the season. So that's how the YGP thing works. And we want to definitely try to keep our costs down low for them, because they're also a charitable organization giving free services to the community. And it's a really, we're saturated with nonprofits, which is awesome, but finding funding is very competitive and difficult.
What about, do you know the square footage of the cottage versus the bunkhouse? And what I'm getting at is the case law says, one, that a rental to a third party can't qualify for a tax exemption. And here YGP is a charitable organization, so that's additionally sticky, but we're not considering YGP's charitable mission and everything right now. So I think that we have to apply that third-party rental prohibition. But the case law also says that doesn't prohibit us from offering the exemption on the whole property. We can assess only the portion that YGP is renting out, for example. So I mean, how do we do that here? Do you have square footage of the buildings, or do you think the bed split is appropriate? If the BOE made a finding like that, how do we determine how to exempt CR's use versus third-party use?
Well, I mean, square footage of the property, it's going to be pretty small. So I don't know which angle you guys would be willing to approach, but as I said, on this large property, we do all of our, workshops and tool safety training and events, and we store all of our tools. And so for the property.
And that's 150?
150.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 150, the percentage of the, YGP, that would have to be measured or calculated in some way, but it's pretty small. If you're measuring it on beds, that's pretty easy math, 23 to 6. And if you wanted square footage of the actual dwellings, I can get that information for you. I can text somebody right now. But it seems to me like, is it more property based? Because we are using the property for so much more than just beds.
Right. I'm going to look up, you might have given it to us, but your tax parcel record, because they should also split up the assessment based on the houses. But you can keep going. I'll just keep mulling it over.
I'm just sending a little text. So let's see, where are we at? So that's our profit and loss just for that. As far as, I'll go ahead and go into our funding, because I think I wasn't going to originally do that, but Christina, you mentioned something about ability to pay. And so I felt it was important to be publicly vulnerable a little bit, just to tell you a little bit about our funding structure. So we are funded by grants and donations. And in the last quarter of 2019, we actually lost 3 out of 4 of our grants. All 3 for different reasons. One was Wabi Sabi, so they have to spread the love. I totally get it. Love you, Wabi. The other 2 just stopped funding due to restructuring, but we had them for several years. So that was problematic. I want you all to know that our only remaining grant is a federal grant, and we are very thankful for that. But when we're talking about where we get our funding and where we're benefiting, it's very interesting, because I do believe, that we need some local support. We haven't received any city, county, or even state funding. And we've applied for 18 grants in the last 5 months, and we received 1 for $600. And so we're going to need some support to continue what we're doing. And we'll figure it out. It's fine. We're working hard, but I just wanted everybody to know that. And then
Ricky, pardon me,
yeah.
but to Ms. Sloan's last question, when you divide the use of the property between community rebuilds and youth garden, is it fair to say that the only youth garden part is 6 bedrooms? And all of the rest of it is community rebuilt?
Yeah, well, they share the kitchen and stuff too, but yes, it's just 6 beds in a communal house.
On the tax property record, I'm coming up with 16.5% of the property is the assessed value of the cottage. And I get it, that again is a little sticky and not perfect. I don't really know how we would split it off any other way, but FYI, that's the number I just got off the tax roll master record. But we'll deliberate. The BOE will certainly discuss that later after you're done.
Well, I really appreciate you looking at creative solutions for this, because it's wild to think that for sharing our campus and dorm with other needy nonprofits, that could work against us in this situation. So thank you for looking at that.
Well, there's certainly no case law that you know, has these facts. So, you know, it's certainly, I just need to bring it up with them. And so we address it. And so there's a finding. And, you know, the BOE could determine they want to exempt the whole property. I just need to know what I need to know so I can talk to them about it later.
Okay, well, that was kind of the portion of supplemental documents and understanding the property's usage and our rental structure to unpaid service workers. So should I go on to community gift and burden of government lessening?
Yes, I would say so. Does everybody agree? I'm assuming they do, Ricky.
Okay, well, I'm going to just start by saying that our programs are a gift and a benefit to everybody in our community. There's direct recipients that are clearly the homeowners receiving, you know, services that save them, earn them $100,000 in equity or save them $100,000 in equity that make their houses affordable for the type of home that we build, the fact that it, you know, operates energy efficiently, net zero, and then just those certain income brackets cannot get a conventional loan for a house in Moab. I think we all are aware of that. But those houses also have extra rooms, which help provide more rental units. Employers, just having primary residents that decide, okay, I love Moab. I've built a house here. I'm going to invest in this community. You know, from the city, from the hospital, from the schools, from the restaurants, like that's just huge. If we all know what it's like to get one employee that we're like, all right, we can stay open. And then patrons and citizens, just as we were kind of talking about with Arches, when you go into an establishment and they're understaffed and frazzled, it's a terrible experience. Moab experiences that trauma all the time because nothing's set up with enough employees due to housing. So, you know, even our meal that we decide to go out and spend, you know, a nice night out can sometimes be a traumatic experience. So it affects us all to have proper workforce housing. And then of course we do have the element, which we haven't talked much about in this group, that we are an environmental organization, and we're helping to take pressure off of the resources for utilities, electricity, water. You know, we have the first residential composting toilet permit in the state of Utah, and we're hoping that after we complete this experiment that those will be allowed, because it's 2020. And those things basically, I'll just for a second, they flush your toilet with a pint of rainwater versus 1.5 gallons or 2 gallons of drinking water. So we're pretty excited about that. And then of course, just the, you know, housing YGP, housing vistas that are all doing service within the community. I promise you that affects you all. And it's,
Could you take down your screen share?
oh yeah. Did I take it down?
I don't have,
Oh yeah, no, I don't have any. I just kind of have notes for my verbal presentation now. I don't think I have anything else for you to gander, but I can definitely supply this, my notes if you'd like. I don't want to share them with you right now. They're not that pretty. Let's see. So as far as how we, oh, that's gifts to the community. So environmentally too, we've graduated over 300 students, teaching them techniques that offset the carbon footprint. The building industry is responsible for 40% of all CO2 emissions. That's an important responsibility that we all need to think about. And I know it's in the city general plan, and that, you know, we're all concerned about our environment, but we're working hard. It doesn't get talked about very much to help spread better practices in the building industry. I talked about our energy efficient net zero houses. Most of our houses now are creating more energy than they consume. So they're actually adding energy to the stock versus just being sustainable. It's regenerative. Affordable housing, our program saves the homeowner money, making the houses affordable and allowing workforce to actualize homeownership that they wouldn't be able to do without us due to our inflated market and low paying jobs. We have built 33 homes in Grand County that houses 57 primary residents. And also those houses have 92 bedrooms and homeowners rent out those extra bedrooms. So that creates even more housing with rentals. And by the end of 2020, we will have 40 homes. We'll have 8 homes per year starting in 2021 with a projected number of homes built to be 84 in 5 years from now. Our campus vacancy can be used for other unpaid service workers when there is availability, which also takes the burden off of the already burdened housing stock. And then our unpaid service workers at this property supports and contributes service directly to the community. Kind of already went over that. Economic development, housing is economic development. We have improved the land value. We've replaced 16 dilapidated trailers and homes. We've built 19 homes on bare lots and created 8 new properties through development. All of these properties contribute taxes into the tax pool year after year. So when I mention those numbers of 84 homes, I know I'm asking for 2 parcels to be exempt so that we can continue this work and keep feeding into the economic development of our community. It will be it already has been a shoe-in investment, and I hope that the community will invest in us. As far as government burden, that was a really interesting presentation to watch, and I learned a couple things, but it seems to me that local government approves business licenses and business developments, and we've been trying to catch up for decades on the growth of tourism and workforce needs. And so I can't understand how essential workforce housing isn't the responsibility of local government to consider. And it seems to me that most elected officials, some of you in this room have talked about those being initiatives that you would focus on. So I do hope that you continue to understand that housing, it affects everything we do and how we do it and quality of life and how our community, reacts. So I definitely feel that when I've read over, general plans, it seems that the environment, the housing, the workforce, educations, roads, schools, all those things come into play, and we are working alongside and implementing a lot of those areas. So I do think that we are lessening the burden. Without us, there would be a lot less units or rooms for people to live in. And I'm excited that, Curtis, you're optimistic about the housing being solved in 3 years, but there hasn't been a general study published or completed. And although Arroyo Crossing and the Land Trust is really great and the HDHO has been very successful, even in maybe in 3 years, we might meet the demand for the new projected properties that we or dwellings that we need to fulfill, but we still have over 1,000 homes in our area that are burdened with 3 or 4 households under one roof. So none of the general plans are that I've been, or none of the housing studies that is being developed right now is actually published, and it's looking like we're not going to be out of the woods for a while. But I like the optimism, and we're here to help. We also, any new development isn't actually taking into consideration all the dilapidated housing and trailers that basically are illegal to live in and rent out, and nothing's really being done about that. I know that code enforcement has their hands full and they'll get to it, but we want to help replace those trailers so that they're safe and acceptable housing units. So even if we do meet our match of new development, we'll have a lot of damage to undo.
So, Ricky, on the government burden question, education is a recognized government burden. the case law says that it's organizations that are providing educational services that are like traditional educational services. But can you talk more about what your education program looks in the partnership with USU?
Yeah, our partnership with USU is you know, it's not, we don't do degrees or credits, but our students can get credit through USU for fulfilling our program. But we basically do workforce training. So we're a trade school, essentially. And we accept students without any experience or qualifications. And we do provide them housing and food in exchange for their labor so that they can, you know, gift that portion to the homeowners, thus making the homes affordable. But we are teaching them how to build an energy efficient straw bale home. And with that education, we have several side workshops like permaculture, you know, anything that we can do that will be environmentally friendly is basically our focus of our curriculum.
Do you know how the credits work at USU? Like, is it full credit hour for hour, or do you know anything about that?
It was 6 credit hours for the 5-month semester. And then several, now that when we had a switch of directors, that changed, that something with the state changed, but they're working to reestablish that. But up until about 2018 or 17 or whatnot, our students were able to take advantage of that without paying any registration fees. They just kind of paid for their credits.
And currently they're not allowed to get credits?
I don't think we have remedied that situation, but everybody at USU is working on that. It's
Okay.
just things.
And then is some of your programming open to the community, or is it just your students?
I mean, honestly, our job sites are an open classroom always and forever. You know, we do get community service people or universities come and do field trips here, churches, all sorts of service groups come. But educational people who want to build their own house will come for certain phases. So yes, we have an open classroom on our job sites. It's the dorm that has a capacity. The actual, you know, we have only a limited amount of students that we can actually take on full capacity with housing and food.
And the property, right, Ricky, part of the property is used for the educational side of your program. Did you say you did workshops and safety on the properties that you're asking for relief?
Yeah, we have our whole building supply center. Wabi Sabi hasn't been taking building supplies, so we've been trying to do everything we can to divert things from the landfill and reuse things. So we have a big wood pile, and we're always trying to clean up wood and you know, fix various household fixtures. But yeah, we do conduct most of our workshops and classroom days at the bunkhouse or in the yard.
Thank you.
So to clarify, we're talking about just one of these properties right now. Is that true? I know that things apply to both properties from this presentation, but right now we're talking about the bunkhouse or the cottage?
They're on the same property. So correct, Ricky, the cottage and the bunkhouse and sort of the classroom open property is 150 South, 200 East, and there's a 4-unit building the CR uses on 140 South, 200 East, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, we're talking about a lot of things, Jalen, because I'm talking about how we're a gift to the community with our programming and the housing. So if anybody, it's really confusing. There's a lot going on. You know, you have to stack functions to make anything happen in this town. So let me know if you have any questions, but.
So
Okay.
I think what she's asking, are we predominantly talking about 1 150 South, 200 East right now?
I think that we can consider them both and deliberate together, but we need to make separate findings and especially address the YGP rental. But does that answer your question, Jalen?
Yeah, sort of. I'll just go ahead and ask my bunch of questions I've got.
Okay, Jalen.
What was that, Mary?
I said, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
But I believe, Ricky, correct me if I'm wrong, you're looking for an exemption for both of those properties, although they are separate properties and they may be considered separately. Is that right?
Yes, I filled out 2 applications, for one for each property, even though it's very, it's very muddled as far as how we use them, but I'm fine to answer questions about them specifically. There are differences within the two properties and some similarities, but.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Yeah, and there are 2 separate agenda items is why I asked. But my questions probably apply to both anyway. So the first question is, I believe on the application, it's listed that you receive $13,500 in rent. Or maybe that was from one of the P&L. I don't remember.
That's what the YGP rent is.
Okay,
currently.
so that's only a one thing because I saw it in 2 places and I wondered if it was 13.5 times 2 or just the one. Seemed to make more sense if it was just one, so thank you. And you've answered my next question, YGP pays that. And then on the old, the reason I am so confused is I just realized about an hour before the meeting that I was not working with the updated version. So I'm working with 4 different PDFs between emails and things like that. So on page 111 of the old document, it's your profit and loss, and it lists, I'm trying to get there, 8,000. Okay, I'm almost there. Sorry, that's not making sense. Oh, okay. First of all, on your profit and loss, it lists $30,000 of rental income, and I probably missed your explanation of that. Can you just quickly tell me where the other 6,500 comes from?
Well, okay, let's see. How do I want to tell this story? We get audited every year, which is actually really nice because they go through and like check every single, transaction. We had 3 bookkeeper hands last year in our office, and so they have reallocated. So the numbers that I'm using, so we just had our audit 1st of March. And so they've reallocated. So I have a more up-to-date P&L, and those numbers for income is the 18,800. But the additional income from YGP is just those building apprentices that pay the $350, and we have one Vista that's working with the health department. She wasn't paying last year, but I'm just saying that small amount of additional income is for those that are either not affiliated with our program, but doing service in Moab and paying an affordable rent amount, or the building apprentices that are getting a paycheck, although it be modest, and paying for their housing because they're not getting housing in exchange for their labor. They actually do get a paycheck.
Okay.
It's around the federal minimum wage.
And then on that same P&L, you have a line item that lists $8,500 as property tax.
Yeah.
What property is that? What's that budgeted for?
It's for the 2 parcels. It's why we're here today.
That the total for those 2 parcels is $8,500 per year.
Yeah. Well, each split. So about 41. They're calculated differently, but they're both just over 4,000.
Okay. Okay. And then you have 3 separate line items that are listed as utility expenses that total 14,200. And I guess I probably have this wrong because apparently I don't have the properties in my head straight, but I thought there was the bunkhouse and then the cottage. What else is there that you're paying utilities on?
The other parcel, the 140 South 200 East parcel, has a 4-unit apartment house.
Okay.
So there's 3 dwellings, and they all have
Okay.
their own utilities associated with them.
Okay, you just suddenly got really quiet. I don't know if everybody else heard that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's 3 dwellings, and they all have their own meters.
Okay.
Utility meters.
Okay. So who would you say are the recipients of this charitable service?
So I kind of went over that with talking about the homeowners, or the most obvious through our programming, but the renters that they also house, employers with continued stabilizing workforce that invests in Moab, a future in Moab. I mentioned patrons and citizens from those establishments that receive a long-term primary resident employee. The environment affects us all. And so our work is helping to undo the bad that is done with building. And then more directly, sidebar, YGP and everyone who their interns help give service to, and the VISTA program, because we provide them affordable short-term service worker housing.
Okay. And remind me what you used to do. You used to replace pre-19, can't remember the exact year, 75-ish trailers?
76, good job.
76. What are the criteria now to qualify to build a home? And because I think you've said low or very low income, what does that look like for a family of 4 or 2?
We're banded now with our income levels. So it means anyone under 55,800, I want to say. It changes slightly from time to time. So a household income of 55,800 or below is eligible for our program.
Okay.
And unfortunately, right now, due to the inflated land cost prices, we pretty much need a household income of 30 grand or more in order to just make the project work, even with all of the free labor and the contracting services. But when the land trust land is available, we are excited to dip back into the very, very low income brackets, 25K or lower, which there's a lot of them.
Okay.
What does that mean? What's the partnership with the land trust?
Oh, the land trust will just have land available. So let's see, how do I summarize this shortly? So basically you'll pay like 17 to 31,000 is what I've heard per lot, just for the development infrastructure fee. But there won't be any other land cost. The homeowner will be leasing the land long-term and paying a small fee for that. So it basically, they could bring a project of ours down to under 100 grand if we really needed it to without sold. So
But
we
you don't
can,
you don't get a certain number of lots or any of that. There's no,
we don't like just automatically.
right.
We've been approved for our first 3 phases. So we have, I need to get back to Patrick. I'm gonna sign on the first 12 parcels after this
Okay.
meeting.
Wow.
So we do have, yeah.
Wow.
So we did, to answer your question though, we did start out as trailer replacement. We would like to continue that, but because of the, more hotels, more businesses, more people want to live in Moab, those trailers are not being sold anymore for a reasonable level. They're being sold for, $170,000, $180,000 when cash buyers can buy them. And so as soon as code enforcement can start, demanding that those structures be replaced or improved, we'd like to, I don't want to fulfill our mission or close our doors until we replace all of them. So, or help assist in making that possible. So what we've been doing to keep our program going and getting people in houses is just finding those random single lots or developing a parcel and creating some new lots that are affordable.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it for me.
So are we into the findings phase here?
I want to, I think we're very, I wanted to know if there were any other questions before we go into the finding stage so that Ricky can have an opportunity to ask them. Evan Clapper has joined us. Evan, you there? You're on mute, so if you're there.
Yeah, no, it's a very thorough presentation. I appreciate that. I think Jaylene kind of hit on questions that I had, so no further questions from me.
Anyone else have questions? Steve, do you have anything to add?
Me?
Yes.
So are you going to move into deliberations now?
I want to have, anything that the presenters want to contribute or say before we go into deliberations to have an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, just one small thing. Again, looking at your own Grand County tax exemption guidelines, there's 10 things, but according to your own guidelines, there's no reason to get hung up on any one or two of them. Look at the situation as a whole and whether or not it should qualify for a tax exemption. So, don't get hung up on number 10.
Oh, okay. Let me
Any
clarify
of
that.
They just do that by themselves, so, okay.
Well, just to clarify that, and I do think these need to be revised now that I've put 20 more hours into tax law, but the 6, when it says as established by the Utah Supreme Court, that's the 6 criteria. And those are essentially, it's actually in the first 7. There's one in there that I added, and I can figure out which one that is. Those are the 6 that are the balancing tests that they don't all have to be weighted the same. But the case law is clear since 1985 and forward, since this Utah County case that came back to a strict construction of these cases, that you need a showing of community benefit and you need a showing of community gift. And the community gift, for Evan's sake, if I can find it again, there are 2 factors that the case law considers, and that's a substantial imbalance between the charity recipient and the organization and alleviation of the government burden. And so we need to make findings on the community benefit and we need to make findings on the community gift.
Good job, by the way, Ricky.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here, Steve, and everybody.
And sorry, Chrissy, is that when we make those findings, are we doing that with the applicants or is that in a pseudo closed session?
There's no provision in Utah law to allow us to deliberate in closed session. So we are doing it openly. And so Joette sat through it. She was denied the exemption. The Friends were denied the exemption. And so, you know, we need to, what we landed on last time was, you know, instead of going through the guidelines line by line, was having one BOE member take the lead on establishing findings, and then other people sort of weighing in. We had a no, I don't support it, and a yes, I do support it findings, and then we worked our way forward from there. Because you missed the prior conversation, the alleviation of government burden is an important one. There is no case law that establishes workforce housing of working age and able-bodied people as a state burden. That doesn't mean we can't make that finding ourselves, but we have to make the finding. And the workforce housing discussion with the Friends application was really focused on workforce housing that supports the federal government. And there's also a finding that the recipient of the Friends charity, in terms of the charitable use of the property, which was the house, was the federal government. So it's a different conversation. We still need to talk again about workforce housing here. And then there's another component here, which is education. And education is a standing state government burden, but the case law says, you know, it needs to be an organization providing educational services similar to traditional public education. So we need to, if we find that community rebuilds fits that definition, we need to make that finding.
Well, I would say that if USU is recognizing them and offering credits, that's a pretty traditional form of traditional institution.
Right. It's problematic, though, that they have not offered credits for the last, it sounds like, up to 3 years.
But it doesn't seem like the curriculum itself has changed. I know that there's, sorry, are we still going back and forth with the applicants, or are we beyond that?
No, I think it's been an hour. We need to go ahead and deliberate.
Sure. Well, I know that that there are a lot of workforce in the community. There's builders that are working to develop homes independent of community rebuilds that were originally trained by community rebuilds. So I think that there's a strong argument for them gaining an education in this process. And I think that with the recipients of the homes not being restricted to any kind of one organization, like with the Friends of Arches and Canyonlands, that you know, there is a benefit there. And if education is considered a gift, then I personally see this as a gift to the community.
Okay, so, and then I'm going to, so what we did before is I summarized sort of the yes, and then you let me know if that's what you want to find. So,
can I just chime in on that last point? Because traditional education, that's kind of a slippery slope. And sure. They're definitely providing some education. And if anything, I think we need more vocational education for people to gain skills that they can go out and benefit the rest of the community with.
Okay, so Evan, your findings would be workforce housing for low income individuals is a government burden.
Well, no, I think I'm more excited about the fact that of the education.
Okay, thank you. So so the finding would be that CR provides a vocational education program which constitutes a government burden, some such, constitutes a service the government would provide. And then who is, so the recipient of the charity, and I will say, I think it's addressed somewhat ambiguously in some of the case law. I interpret that as meaning the recipient of the charitable exclusive use. So that's the recipients of the property, not the greater CR work they're doing. That goes into the community benefit analysis. It doesn't go into the community gift analysis. So the recipients.
Well, considering that the county itself is utilizing Vista volunteers, and there's the opportunity for Vista to be put up on these specific properties, then, you know, that seems like a no-brainer for me. The county wouldn't be able to have our Vista volunteers if they couldn't have housing.
Ricky, are the Vista volunteers all YGP workers, or are there additional people?
No, there's no Vista YGP right now. There's you know, we've had different Vistas, but right now we have a CR Vista and a health department Vista. But our vacancy is only, it's a small amount, but it's beds, and it will be available to unpaid service workers. So I think what Evan's trying to say is a good point. It's investing in all of our projects that benefit everybody, having this preserved housing. So thanks for mentioning that.
Okay, so the recipients of the charity benefit from a substantial imbalance between the cost of the housing and what they're charged. And then what is your community benefit finding, Evan?
I believe the community from these specific properties or from the mission itself?
Mission itself.
I mean, the mission itself, I think that it's, you know, Ricky spoke pretty extensively to that it's keeping workforce here long term, you know, folks that may have been here on a seasonal sort of thing or have been priced out are able to stick around and not just contribute to the economy of our community, but live in a more livable situation than these outdated trailers and lessen their footprint environmentally in our desert landscape here. So I think that the solar power and the gray water and everything that they're doing is commendable. And I think that other people in the community are recognizing that and mimicking the building styles outside of CR projects.
And I need you to make talk at least a little bit to education, since that was your primary finding of the gift.
Sorry. I think that now these builders have this skill set that they can deliver it to other folks on the free market that don't have to meet the criteria of CR. So there's these eco builders in our community now that are developing continued housing, and CR has trained these builders to be able to deliver this niche product that you know, our high schools and our USU campus are not providing.
Okay. Does that work for everyone who wants to opine?
Yeah, the only problem I have with that is the fact that USU is not giving any credit for those kids anymore.
Also, I do think we need to talk about it, 6 credits for a semester. It doesn't seem like a lot of credit. So, you know, I don't think we should rely on the USU partnership, both because it's low credits when they're given and they're not even being given right now. But that doesn't undermine, I mean, Evan can still make his finding that vocational education constitutes a government burden. That doesn't minimize his finding, but for purposes of discussion, I think, you know, the USU partnership doesn't help support sort of a public education component, in my opinion. Greg, do you have any other comments?
So So how much tax money are we talking about here?
I think that's beside the point, though.
We cannot, how does it put, we learned, when I read that at the beginning. Let me find it.
Yeah, the question is, do they qualify under these
And
Okay, all
the
right,
various
never mind.
guidelines? Because if they qualify, it's an automatic exemption.
Okay, never mind.
Yes, so Mary, are you and Christina, are you asking us to speak to Evan's finding right now?
Yeah, sort of do what we did before. So if you want to present, support that or present another view.
Yeah, so
go ahead,
if
Curtis.
okay, so sorry, I lost my camera there. Evan, so I guess the point about the education and the training that's kind of spinning out into the community, I don't disagree with that. I think if I'm understanding him right, he's attributing that to the environmentally, those values of the product that they deliver. Because I mean, there's developers and builders that that train people through employment, that go on to deliver products, that you can attach to a community benefit right and left. So it's not unique to them, but it seemed like he was centering in on the environmental value there. And when we get into that, I go back to, if are they providing a service that we would otherwise have to perform? And Ricky, kind of referenced some of my previous comments about affordable housing. Not that I said that it was solved, but the affordable housing task force that Community Rebuilds, has had board members involved with in their works, they actually define specific numbers and benchmarks and goals. And it's a matter of fact that we are, on track to meet and exceed those goals for the affordable component of this. And so it's not a, I guess I don't see it as optimism as much as just a statement. And so there's two parts of this. There's the environmental values that are involved in the product that they deliver that are being referenced so far, like in Evan's point. And then there's just this blanketed, generalized, like affordability, value that in their product. And that gets, sticky even, in the affordable housing plan, in the key findings of the affordable housing study. Specifically, that group references land regulations and low density single family detached dwellings with minimal mixed use development, which leads to inefficient land use. And so specifically with the Community Rebuilds product, it is a niche product. But by the affordable housing plan and the task force on standards, that is the product they're delivering, which is a low density detached unit that's single family. And so right there, back to the affordable housing plan, there's an argument that that's an inefficient land use and that's creating burden on the housing stock. And so there's a definite, point there. And so without this product that they're delivering, I'm not denying that their product is an affordable product compared to to a lot of the product that's on the market. But it's a product for a specific demographic that's interested in environmental sustainability and a single family unit. And so if they weren't delivering those products to the market, would Grand County have to provide those products to the market? And the answer is no. We don't provide housing for our own employees. If Community Rebuilds wasn't taking donations and building straw bale single-family homes that are low density, would we have to provide that service? And the answer is no. We are doing things, you know, back to the land costs are high, so housing costs are high. Land costs are high because there's a very limited supply that's also noted in the housing plan. What did we do to address that? We addressed the land use regulations that's referenced in the same line to increase density. And so that is not the same as Grand County building straw bale homes that are low density. So I guess in our findings, I think we should identify specifically if we're talking about the affordability standpoint or the environmentally friendly standpoint, because there are a lot of companies that provide environmentally friendly product, but they do it privately without property tax exemptions.
There's also no sort of environmental component of any of the case law. So I think focusing on workforce housing or education are the two ways that are supported by Utah law. Yay or nay?
Okay, well, the workforce housing opponent, I think I, you know, addressed referencing the affordable housing plan, and the typology and the product that they're delivering. The education component, if they're not currently providing credits from an institution, and the point is being made that people are learning skills while volunteering their time, I don't see that as sufficient evidence of the education component. I mean, that happens everywhere, every day.
Gillian, are you getting ready to speak?
I think wait. Okay, yes, I am unmuted. I think I'm ready. As ready as I'll be. It's going to be very jumbled because, again, I'm working with a bunch of different documents plus my scribbled notes.
Hello. Yeah.
Mute
Tell him to
yourself.
mute himself. He did.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to start by briefly, well, I will reiterate that again, the recipient, it depends on who the recipient is. And in this case, the recipient can be those who live in the houses or those people who are benefited by the people who are living in the houses, which in my mind seems like kind of not a direct enough chain of events. It's kind of secondary. But in any case, you have to consider those two groups. Do they provide the service, a significant service to others without the immediate expectation of a material reward? Yes. Although in the case of community rebuilds providing this housing to their interns, the reward that they would get from that, and I would argue require, is volunteer labor. So there is a reward for providing that housing. Are the recipients of the charity required to pay for the assistance received in whole or in part? If you're talking about the interns, yes, they provide labor to the organization. Let's see, definitely nonprofit income. Probably in most years does not exceed expenses. Are the beneficiaries restricted or unrestricted? I would argue that they are restricted. And well, it's restricted to a group of nonprofit workers in our town. I love the VISTA program. I can name probably a dozen people who have directly benefited through the VISTA program. They've benefited the community by furthering their education and taking jobs in the community with a lot of responsibility. So I have a lot of respect for that program. But are we required to provide housing to that group? Again, I'll go back to the comments from the Utah Supreme Court. That group, none of them are composed of insane, helpless orphans, indigent, or elderly, low-income people, or handicapped. So I would say no, we're not obligated to provide housing. The county works with the tools that we have. We support the development of housing by, first of all, zoning regulations and legislation that might encourage that, which would include the high density housing overlay and the assured housing. But to provide housing directly to beneficiaries, I would find that is not within our purview. As far as education, I would find that's not a county obligation either. It is, while education may be a component of state government, federal government, they fund those institutions. We also fund education through property taxes. But to subsidize an organization by exempting them from taxes so that we can, and then saying that we're doing it because we are obligated to provide that education, we are not. That should be a partnership between private entities and only government entities, to the extent that they are state institutions such as the universities. We have a couple of 2 or 3 or 4 state universities. And yes, in that case, education is part of their development. Let's see what else I have. I mean, the analysis for me in the end is very similar to the other one, to the Friends of Arches. The beneficiaries are restricted to the unpaid interns that work in Grant County. And at the end of the day, I would say this property does not appear, neither of these properties appear to meet the test. Use is exclusively charitable, serving the common good. It serves a specific group of people, unpaid interns. And while it is a good service, it misses serving the common good. There are numerous residents throughout our county that need reduced rental costs, but they must pick up the tab not only for themselves through higher payments to a landlord or paying property taxes themselves, but in the event the property tax was granted for this tax exempt status, in the event this property was granted tax exempt status for the unpaid interns as well. Since the tax burden does not go away, it's spread across all the remaining taxpayers. Property taxes are a reasonable part of O&M, operation and maintenance, and it would be unequitable to place that burden on all the property owners across the valley when the property benefits a few. Having said that, I do love the work Community Rebuilds does. I've watched them for 8 years at least, and I think they're amazing. I think Emily was amazing because it was her brainchild, and I have the deepest respect for you. I think that's all I have.
Jalen, you can share. So you have those in writing, the stuff you've been reading out. You can send those to me and they can be the basis if there's a consensus for the decision.
I would, this is Greg.
I
would support Jay Lynn's findings on that.
I would like to comment. My findings is that Moab Community Rebuilds does meet the tax exemption criteria for 2 reasons. Providing educational opportunities for the interns that are working consistently with Moab Community Rebuild, and the organizations that come from out of the area to learn from the expertise that Moab Community Rebuild has that very few other organizations can provide. This is a specialized area that it is hard to find the training, this type of training. Thus, people come from all over to receive this training because it is unusual and beneficial for many, many reasons. The other part, that the educational part that I think is very, very important, is that it provides skilled laborers for a very stressed field in Grand County. The builders in Grand County struggle finding qualified laborers in our county. You can talk to any contractor in this town and they are strapped and in finding someone that is able to come on their job and perform the duties that they need. Moab Community Rebuilds provides the opportunity for people to gain those skills, and thus is providing an unmet need in this community for skilled laborers in the building field. And that is a need in this community. The other reason I feel that they qualify is this is a gift by replacing unsafe housing and providing housing for low-income families. This is a gift because of the dwelling in this community is found unsafe, and part of our job as legislators is the safety and well-being of our citizens. And when Community Rebuild is helping us provide that safety and well-being for our communities by replacing homes that are unsafe. And so that it meets one of the duties of our county council and our elected officials. As said before, so between providing safe housing and providing educational opportunities, and I'm sure within time there will be credits also once again available, but I feel it meets both the educational and the gift for providing safe housing. So I do find they meet the tax exempt.
Okay, well, I've heard a consensus to deny the exemption. Does anyone want to change their mind, or should I work on a decision and we will get back together when that's ready? So that was Curtis, Greg, and Jaylyn, consensus to deny. And I'll work on that decision. I just want to make sure none of the BOE members want to comment further or change their position based on Mary's comments.
No, thank you for all your work on this.
They're hard decisions, guys.
Yes.
Christina, you said consensus. What are the votes on the other side?
Mary and Evan support the tax exemption, and Curtis, Greg, and Jaylyn do not. So I have a 3-2 consensus. Now, I'm going to write the decision and I'm going to put that forth to the BOE for adoption before it's formal. You have until May 1 to do that, and you will get a decision or a copy of that written decision.
So who is not participating?
Well, Gabriel had to recuse himself since he works for
Gabriel recused,
YGP,
right?
and then Rory has not called in.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you
much.
for participating, and thank you, Ricky. The meeting, we have reached the end of our agenda, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
No.
They've got 5.
I thought it
That's
was
enough. They only need enough to take a vote, and they have.
Okay. Yep. We didn't pass